Hello and welcome into our News4Jags mock draft. You got the whole department here. Jamal St. Cyr, Justin Varney, Cole Pepper. We will be taking a close look at what the Jaguars could and should do in the upcoming NFL draft. Guys, let's start with what the Jaguars are going to be thinking about here as they enter the draft. Jamal, to me, the real question is, are you going tackle or are you going pass rusher?
Yeah, that's the options you have to weigh. They've definitely invested heavily into the offensive side of the ball in free agency. They did bring in some defensive guys. You have to decide what's the best thing for your team right now, as well as who the best player available is. You're kind of looking at Evan Neal, Akeem Ekwonu as those two top offensive linemen. And then the other side, you got Aiden Hutchinson. We thought it was going to be Kayvon Thibodeau. Looks like it's Trayvon Walker now as the other possible defensive guy that they're looking at. So weighing that offensive defensive thing it's a big talking point.
And Justin, bang for the buck is a part of this too, not just in this first year, but also down the road. So where should the Jaguars be looking? Big guy on offense, pass rusher on defense?
Yeah, I think with Cam Robinson, you know, the franchise tag has been slapped on him. He's not yet signed it. But I think they've got a guy in Cam Robinson already in the fold that they can build on. We already know what Cam is. He is an average to above average tackle. I think it's more difficult to find a dominant pass rusher, which I think Aiden Hutchinson or Trayvon Walker have the potential to be, than it is to find that guy at a position where Cam is already in there. So I do think you help the pass rush, you bolster the pass rush with a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, with a guy like Trayvon Walker. I think it's difficult to find that. And what you do there is unlock the potential for a Josh Allen to really take that step forward.
All right. The other side of the conversation is you drafted your franchise quarterback last year. Not that he was sacked a bunch, more or less, but build around the offense. Yeah, you've got Cam Robinson. But that franchise tag's only a one-year deal. You really don't have an established left guard. Ben Bart should be the guy there. I got outvoted here, by the way. I wanted to take the big guy. Give me Evan Neal. Put him at left guard if you have to for a year, then bump him out to a left tackle in the future. Maybe they like Walker Little so much that they think he's your left tackle in the future. But for the purposes of this, it's a 2-1 vote. I lose. So the Jaguars are going to go defense. So, Jamal, let's talk about the choices they have there at number one.
One of those guys, of course, Aiden Hutchinson, the pass rusher from Michigan. He's been the front runner in the doghouse for a while now when it comes to that pass rush conversation. Definitely a fierce pass rusher. He showed what he can do, and it's not often that you start talking about a defensive player as a finalist for the Heisman. Well, he did it. So you know he had a really good season, but is he really the player that the Jaguars need? We'll have to wait and see how that works out. Hutchinson, definitely a very talented player. I know probably the clip that most people have seen is him just putting that Ohio State offensive tackle on his back. That's the kind of player that Aiden Hutchinson is.
He's been compared to the Bosa brothers. So the question you ask yourself is, would you take the Bosas number one overall?
I would take the Bosas. I just don't know if he's a Bosa.
Well, okay, if you like that comparison. The other thing is, of course, is this draft the kind of draft that has a clear number one? Clearly, that's not the case right now, Justin. He's not the only guy the Jaguars are considering on the defensive side.
Yeah, that's right. When last year, definitive number one. Trevor Lawrence was the generational quarterback prospect. Jaguars just so happened to have that number one pick. Not as easy this year. We're a couple weeks before the draft, and we still have no idea where the Jaguars are leaning. So that adds that intrigue element to it. And we talked about Kayvon Thibodeau. We've talked about Aiden Hutchinson, but a dark horse, Trayvon Walker from Georgia, and he is a guy that doesn't have that college production like an Aiden Hutchinson has, doesn't have that massive motor like a Kayvon Thibodeau has flashed at Oregon. So is that Trayvon Walker pick really going to entice those Jaguars fans? Is he that best pick at number one overall? He's kind of been a name that surfaced in the last couple weeks just as a possible mock selection to the Jaguars. So will be interesting to see if Trayvon Walker kind of edges out Aiden Hutchinson for that number one spot.
A physical freak. His measurables are off the charts. Didn't have the production that Hutchinson did. Of course, he was playing with a lot of guys who are going to get drafted this year on that Georgia defense, and how he was utilized a little bit different. So it's more of a projection pick if you go there. It's more of maybe a high floor pick if you go with Aiden Hutchinson. So, Jamal, let's make the pick at number one for the Jaguars. Where are we going in our News4Jags mock draft?
All right, Jaguars are on the clock at number one, and it came down for us between Hutchinson and Walker, and I guess I made the deciding vote. I said, I like to throw things out there, and let's go with the smoke. Where there's got to be some fire with all that smoke. We're going to go Walker at number 1. We're going to go for the high upside on this pick. You know, Walker is definitely the higher upside player. If it all comes together for Walker, he could be a premier pass rusher in this league. Hutchinson, if it all comes together, could also be a very good pass rusher. He's definitely the high floor, safe way to go. Let's, toss risk to the wind and go Walker.
All right, let's take a look at the pick, the number 1 pick in the draft. There it is, Trayvon Walker in our mock draft. So as a result, you can see how the next handful of picks went. Aiden Hutchinson, boy, talk about a happy fan base in Detroit to get the Michigan kid at number 2. Evan Neal there goes at number 3 to the Houston Texans, who need help everywhere. Ike Ekwonu going to the Jets at number 4. Thibodeau at number 5. And then Sauce Gardner, the cornerback, at number 6. Now, one of the interesting questions here is going to be about what happens with the quarterback. In past years, the Jaguars would have been sitting at number 1 with their quarterback, and most years somebody wants to trade up for a quarterback. That's not happening this year because there isn't that number 1 quarterback. But that's the early. We showed you there the Carolina Panthers, probably the earliest that a quarterback might go. So that's an intriguing pick to look at. And as you start to think about, well, what happens for the Jaguars in their second pick, the 33rd pick of the draft, the first pick of the 3rd round, you have to kind of note who goes where. So let's take another look at those picks that we have mocked here. We do have a quarterback going at number 8, and that is Malik Willis going to the Falcons out of Liberty. And then let's just go down the line here. Interesting picks here to me. You got Devontae Wyatt, another Georgia Bulldog, there at 14, going to the Ravens. And Jermaine Johnson at number 15, we're mocking him, Justin, to the Philadelphia Eagles, a guy who was on the Georgia Bulldogs a couple of years ago, transferred to Florida State, and had a huge year and a huge Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Eagles need pass rusher. They need a lot of help. You've seen them making trades to get there. But Jermaine Johnson, he's a guy that has been mocked even higher than that than we've got him up to. So interesting slot in that mid-first round, but that's where he fell in our mock draft. Eagles need the Florida State edge rusher.
Wide receiver is another position the Jaguars are going to be talking about quite a bit. And we've got Chris Olave going at 18 to the Eagles in their second. They had 3 first-round picks at one point, now 2 after the trade with the Saints. Olave is a guy who could potentially be a target for the Jaguars if they were to trade back up into that first round. I also have wide receiver Treylon Burks out of Arkansas going to the Patriots, 1 pick ahead of Jahan Dotson. You would figure the Packers are going wide receiver one way or another after everything that's happened, who they've lost, Devontae Adams, trying to keep Aaron Rodgers happy if that is possible. Which of the Jaguars, right now, we got there to 22 we're talking about. What are the Jaguars thinking at that point if they're thinking wide receiver? Jamal, where are they hoping to find that guy?
Well, at that point, the run on wide receivers has already happened. I think the Jaguars at that point are starting to have to say, you know what, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer, because the perfect situation is the injury scares everyone away from Jamison Williams. He slides maybe into those early 20s, late 20s, and the Jaguars say, all right, that's our guy, we go get him. Yeah. That's perfect situation. I mean, if you want to even go perfect, he falls to 33. But that injury hasn't scared people away the way many thought that it would, or at least in our mock draft it hasn't. So that's probably a little rich for their blood. We know at some point there is going to be a run on receivers in this first round. It just happens every year. And if it happens this early, starts late teens, goes into the 20s, the Jaguars have to start thinking, it's going to be 3rd or 4th round before you go receiver.
All right, so we passed on Evan Neal with the Jaguars at the top of the draft and Ekwonu. So as we look at the last part of this first round, there are some offensive linemen that could pop in here. By the way, I want to point out another Georgia Bulldog, Jordan Davis, going right there at number 23. Bernard Raymond is the next tackle on the board. We have him going at 25 to the Buffalo Bills. Another Georgia Bulldog, Nakobe Dean, linebacker, going to the Titans. Then you start seeing some interior linemen. Kenyon Green, Texas A&M, going to the Bucs at 27. Zion Johnson from Boston College, a versatile offensive lineman, certainly has his best prospects as a guard. You usually don't see guards picked high in the first round, but this is the point where you kind of see guards in the mid to late 20s. That starts to fit a little bit there. And if you're the Jaguars looking at this, you'd love for one of those guys to fall to you, give you an opportunity to draft somebody there. And then I'll point out one more name here on this board, and that is the 32nd pick that we have in this draft, and that is Kyrie, the Florida Gator. Some have projected him to go, Justin, somewhere in the 20s. Some have him as an early second-round pick. It's going to be very intriguing to see how the Gators do in terms of the first round.
Yeah, and he's the only guy for Florida who could get that first-round call. And you've seen him a little bit mocked all over the boards as, you know, deep as a second-round pick, even a mid-second-round pick in some mocks that I've seen. So this, I think, you know, probably a good spot for Kyrie to go in its tail into the first round. Keep the Florida Gators in the first round. Would be nice for recruiting to be able to say, hey, we got a first-round pick again this year. But I do think that Kyrie goes in that latter half of the first round.
Maybe a little less of an impact on recruiting considering the guy who recruited him isn't there anymore. But, hey, now that you put another tally on the board. All right, so now here the Jaguars are at number 33. And, Jamal, there are a number of areas they could go here. They could go a lot of different directions. But we do know that there is one major need on the offensive side of the football as it stands right now, and that is that number one receiver. Can they find a number one receiver for this year? Can they find a future number one receiver with a 33rd pick?
No. No, we saw that run on receivers go in the mid-first round. At that point, a lot of the guys that really have that upside potential off the board. I think the biggest need that the Jaguars could use at 33 is on the defensive side of the ball, that interior linebacker spot. When they kind of jettisoned Myles Jack, deciding he wasn't a part of the future, opened up a big opening in that linebacker role. They need somebody there that can fill that linebacker spot next to Foye. So until they find that person, I think 33 is the spot where they can get someone who can come in and really help to fill that role on the defense. And there are still linebackers that can make that day one impact available.
And one that pops to mind right away would be Leo Chenal from Wisconsin, who could potentially fit in there. Again, we don't know exactly the way that they're going to utilize this defense under Mike Caldwell. It is going to be a 3-4, but they're going to be multiple. So what they're asking of that position, still yet to be determined, probably to be determined based on who they have in that spot, Justin. I actually do think they can find a receiver that can develop into that top spot. And there are a couple of names that we're going to throw around here. One is George Pickens. This has been a popular conversation among Jaguars fans. Former Georgia Bulldog, coming off an injury, does look like he's fully healed at this point, doesn't have a lot of tape from last year because of the injury. But you go back further, he's a big, tall receiver who can get downfield, battles for the ball when it's in the air. Most mock drafts have him in the mid-second rounds. Maybe this is a stretch, but hey, if you need a guy and you think that he can develop into that number one X receiver, somebody to consider.
Yeah, it is. You know, I did consider George Pickens with its first pick of the second round. I made this pick here at number 33 for the Jaguars. And, you know, deviating a little bit from you, Jamal, I think since you did not address, and I was on board with what you were saying, Jameson Williams, we've been talking about that on our News4Jax podcast for months. If Jameson Williams somehow fell to that early 20 slot, you go up and get him if you're the Jaguars. He did not in our mock draft. And I do think that Jacksonville doesn't have that alpha yet in the receiver room. So, it could be George Pickens. John Mechie's still out there. Sky Moore is out there. So a lot of receivers still on that board with that first pick in the second round. And I think you need to go receiver to get that DJ Chark kind of guy, which you found in the second round. He became that number one guy for you. I think they stick to that same philosophy here with that first pick of the second round.
All right, let's make the pick. Justin, you had the pick in our mock draft, so who are you going with at 33?
That is, I went with a guy, I looked over Sky Moore, a guy, didn't play in the biggest conference. And I looked at George Pickens. He's that big receiver there. And I wound up going with
Christian Watson right there.
Christian Watson of North Dakota State.
Yeah, there he is at number 33. All right, so in this mock draft, the Jaguars get number one pick, pass rusher, number two pick, pass catcher. Both in this situation, Jamal, would be projections.
Yes.
Guys who either didn't have the productivity in terms of the sack numbers or a guy who played at a smaller conference. Watson can fly. He's a sub 4.4 guy. He could really move, has good size. I think he and Pickens are the two potential develops who could be second-round picks, who could develop into that number one receiver. I don't think he's ready for it right now. It's tough for a receiver to be that coming right out unless you're a Calvin Johnson, Andre Johnson type of player.
Right, and that's why I kind of leaned away from receiver a little bit at 33, because I feel like the Jaguars just have a glut of guys right now, and they need somebody to lead. They need an alpha in that room that they don't have. I don't think you get it at 33. I do like Christian Watson. I think he has the size, speed combination that you look for when you start talking about upside for receiver. Obviously, the level of play is the talker of why he's probably there that late. If he plays and has the same sort of production that he had at a bigger conference school, we're probably probably talking about someone in the first round consideration. So definitely Watson is the pick when you start saying, okay, future projections 2-3 years down the road, if he puts it all together, could he be a number one wide receiver in the NFL? I think so. The big question is, where does he fit on day one roster when you start looking at the Jaguars wide receiver room, and it's like, all right, well, we're going to have to start playing this numbers game of what veteran guy that fans might know the name of isn't going to be here.
Well, I'll also say this. The Chiefs have 2 picks at the end of the first round. They lost the cheetah. They would love to get a speed receiver. That could be another landing spot for Watson as the draft goes on. All right, that's our first annual, is there such thing?
Yeah.
Our inaugural News4Jags mock draft. So for Jamal St. Cyr, for Justin Barney, I'm Cole Pepper. Thanks for watching. You can see the entire mock draft on the story on News4Jax.com, and we'll be looking forward to draft day.